59 has worked on some pretty large and pretty extraordinary projects over the last 10 years. I have to say that the prospect of projection mapping onto Sydney Opera House is one of the most exciting and one of the most daunting. It's not only possibly the most iconic building in the entire world, but set in one of the most phenomenally beautiful skylines in the world.
Rather than treating the Opera House purely as a screen, we wanted to tell the story of the creation of that building and also take it a bit further than it's ever come before. We broke that into 3 sections. First is about the creation and the birth of the building. The second is about a kind of experimental expression. I suppose think about it as a sort of troublesome teenager experimenting with different aesthetics and personalities. And then a kind of coming of age and rebirth of the building after being subjected to great external pressures. At which point the narrative goes full circle back to the beginning and we see it being born again for the first time.
Because of its very originality, it is clearly a controversial design.
Utzon, the architect who designed the building, came up with an extraordinary concept, which was to base the whole building on a sphere and to remove segments of that sphere and then rejoin them in a different configuration. So actually some of those expressions of pure geometric form that he exploited are things that we're looking at again through the early section of the piece. So we're looking at geometry, we're looking at pure forms like circles and triangles. And then we explore how that became an architectural design, how that became his design vision for the Opera House. When we've shown how the design process kind of came together, we look at then how it was built, how it was kind of raised out of the ground in a very physical, three-dimensional form. And one of the extraordinary things about that building, one of the things which has proven a challenge to us when we've been recreating it both in real-world models and in computer-generated 3D models, is that there is no one part of that building which is the same as any other. Every single tile, every single concrete beam, every construction element is entirely unique. So one of our challenges has been to kind of recreate that building in the similar components in order to then explore it, take it apart again, look at it in different ways.
Past and into your future comes this news. And the news is public service broadcasting.
From the earliest stages of animation, we knew that we wanted to use live action as well to supplement the animation and complement it. So we had a 3D model of the Opera House made, and that model formed the basis for a mould that could then create hundreds more opera houses made of plaster, made of copper, made of all sorts of different materials. And this week we've been subjecting them to various different processes, to heat, to light, to water, to different coloured inks, paints, and all sorts of different things being added to the opera houses.
We've thrown a lot of paint around. We've exploded parts of the opera house. We've exploded things over parts of the opera house. We've built versions of the opera house out of ice and applied various effects to that. We've melted them. Essentially, we're creating a number of analogue effects which we're going to be compositing together with our digitally created effects in order to create something which feels hopefully quite visceral and quite live. One of the effects that we're very keen to create to make as naturalistic as possible is rain and water. There's a storm scene which we're working on in which parts of the opera house are destroyed before it gets reborn. And so creating very strong rain effects, very strong wind effects, and also water pouring down the surface of the opera house is something we've been focusing on. It's taken quite a lot of our energy.
So here we've got sort of the remnants of the week, some glitter, some pigment, some inks, the sort of shattered glass opera house, glass waxed opera house. And the idea of this is to use these organic effects to create something that's kind of really has a real impact on the opera house and feels a bit more real than some of the digital stuff that we've been working on, particularly in combination.
including myself, there's a team of 4 animators working on the project, and have each taken sections, or in some cases worked together on sections, but because of the different styles that we've used, it's been probably easier to allocate those sections to team members. So there's a huge variety within the content of the show is reflected in the animation style. So we've used CG, 2D animation, some hand-drawn stuff, some footage elements, and that helps to create the different looks that we're after, from digital to more organic, raw kind of styles, and hopefully we've succeeded. What I imagine it's like being a crew member of a submarine, where you may work for 8 or 10 hours and have then a very short sleep break, and then back to another 8 or 10 hours.
Once we've built some of these textures, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, we can look at them on screen and we can apply them to our computer-generated 3D model. We can look at different views around the harbour. However, what we've found is the best way to work out what something is going to look like on a real 3-dimensional structure is to project it onto a real 3-dimensional structure. So we've had 3D printed a totally accurate 1:300 model of the Opera House, which we're using to visualise the entire process.
Having had the 3D model to work with means that now we're on site in Sydney, we've really got much more chance of being completely accurate.
I actually find it quite emotional listening to. We used some documentary audio from the launch just after the planning application was approved. You can kind of see that almost everything they hoped for came true. I mean, it's just become this beacon of celebratory kind of art and design and culture and everything, recognised across the world. And yeah, the moments when the apparent sort of solidity of the building breaks down, so there's a section very much towards the end when you've been looking at something which looks like a version of the Copper House rendered in copper, which we did with a scale model in copper. And when that starts to then superheat and break down, you kind of have forgotten that it's not in some way a real object, so you get this sense of a void behind and the whole thing collapsing in itself. So there's a lot of great moments in there, and I think probably everyone will remember something slightly different from it.